Thanks for sticking around. Enough water. Sorry, this is going to be less refined. It's going to be about mud and soil. So if you want to leave the room, it's now or never. Yes, we'll present you a bit of an update of what we've done over the past year on this project that basically looked at two different aspects in a region of Canada, the Abitibi, that is a mining region that has a long history of mining, but also of smelting of metals. And so we'll look at the spatial evolution of the deposition of metal in the environment, but also at the temporal evolution. And we are very lucky to have had a great study that was done more than a quarter of a century ago in this region, and has laid like really the base of what we're going to be talking about here. So this is the team that is working on this project with various level of involvement. We have a partner at NRCan, but also in academia and abroad. And we have 3 students, 2 PhD students and 1 master student that is involved. This is kind of a grocery list of what we've done over the past year. Basically 3 field trips, 2 major one in Abitibi where we collected soil and lake sediment and peat bog, and 1 short winter trip around Quebec City where we did some sort of testing of winter sampling for ostracode in analog sites lake. Work in the lab, we dated all our environmental archive that we're using to reconstruct the flux of deposition of metals and metalloids. And we also did all the geochemistry on those environmental archive, as well as on an extensive amount of soil sample. And we did a bit of a presentation in Rwanda to the general public in order to put in context the result of the Medal of in the Environment project that happened like 25 years ago, and what we're trying to do here as a kind of a baby project. So let's start with the soil and more the spatial aspect of our project. And here you can see on this map the different sampling sites. In blue, this is the sampling site that we have done in the past 2 years now. And we're going to call this data set the IARP data set. And in red, this is the seminal sampling that has been done by Metal in the Environment project. And this is like the MITE data set. So all of this is surrounding Rwanda, which is where you have a smelter that has been in operation then in more than 100 years now, and around where you have a lot of mining activity, past and current. So if we kind of look at only the IARP data set, and we have like a broad overview in terms of principal component analysis, we can see that we have a separation of all our different horizons, depending on the different concentration of our elements in there. And not very surprisingly, we have the humus horizon, which is more the organic horizon of the soil, that is separated from all the other mineral horizons. With a bit of an overlap here, which is due to the fact that sometimes horizon A is a bit hard to differentiate from the humus section. So nothing very surprising here. It does tell us that we have a different elemental concentration pattern in the soil than in the mineral horizons. Now, because we have this great MITE data set that exists already, we are really tempted to try to compare those 2 data sets, but we have to be careful, because one of the thing that needs to be very taken into account is the actual analytical strategy that was applied back in the day versus what we have chosen to apply today. In their sites, in their soil sample, they tested various different type of digestion method in order to try to get different fraction of the metals and metalloids in the soils. And most of what was reported is aqua regia, and not a lot of multi-acid has been done. And multi-acid would be a near total digestion, where you have the more refractory fraction, where aqua regia might miss a little bit of that. And if you compare all the sites where they have done the 2 type of digestion for all the elements, the multi-acid here in the y-axis versus the aqua regia in the x-axis, you see that the aqua regia, this is the 1-to-1 relationship. In red, the aqua regia is underestimating some of those concentrations. Now, if you look at element, and specifically the lead, which is one of the usual suspects in the area, and you look the aqua regia in x-axis and the y-axis, the multi-acid, you see that you're falling on the one-to-one line. So we have done multi-acid digestion because we wanted to have all the refractory as well and some element that not necessarily have been looked at during mites. And so that tells us that we actually can compare the aqua regia digestion from mite with our data set. And this is what we're doing here on this graph. You see the concentration of lead versus the distance from the smelter. The blue dots are the IARP dataset, and the red dots is the mite dataset. So first thing that you see is that you have a decrease of concentration the further you go from the smelter. Nothing new here. We knew that from mite already. And what we can see, though, is that we seem to have less concentration globally in our dataset that mite had. So it might be that some of the lead has been lost somewhere in a different environmental compartment. Doesn't seem to be the mineral fraction since we don't see it in it. Now, if you add the geospatial modeling layer on top of that Nicolas Benoit is leading, you see that the lead dataset is modeled that way, while the IARP dataset is modeled that way. You have a little bit of a different anisotropy on the bullae of the lead dataset at IARP versus mite, which is something we still need to dig a little bit into. There might be there's a lot of like different reasons why that could happen. Now, if we look only at the IARP data set and we just look at, again, this potential relationship of decrease of concentration with distance from the smelter, and you look at all the different elements and you try to find statistical significance into that, you can see that all of these elements actually show a relationship with distance from the smelter. And so in this, you can see the usual suspect, the copper, of course, arsenic, cadmium, lead, etc. But there are also some other that were not looked at really a lot back in the day, and that are actually showing a strong relationship with distance from the smelter. For example, you got indium, tellurium, bismuth. Tin is an interesting one. And what's also interesting, and one of our research questions is, because there is more recycling of electronic waste in the smelter now, do we see any proxy from that? And some rare earth element are actually showing it is a weaker relationship with distance, but do you see a relationship with distance with a rare earth element, for example? Taking tellurium as an example here, you see the geospatial modeling, the lead from the IARP dataset and the tellurium for the IARP dataset. You could almost think that those are exactly the same. It's the same concentration. We just mixed up our Excel spreadsheet, but no, those are actually two different ones, and it just shows that it's a very high spatial correlation of the tellurium with the lead. And as a little segue with the chronology and the reconstruction of flux deposition, here you see the reconstruction of the fluxes of tellurium in two lakes. One that is like Hervé, which is 10 kilometers roughly northeast of Rwanda, and Lac Vaudreuil here, which is 30 kilometers right there southeast as well. And you see a pre-industrial baseline increase with a maximum of flux in the lake in the 60s, 70s, and then a decrease to some sort of lingering residual baseline that is not going down to what's pre-industrial. So now that I teased you a bit about like the chronology and the flux reconstruction, we can move to the environmental archives here. So what we've done, basically, this is the map again with the different site that we've sampled. So we have 6 lakes, 4 peat bog, and 4 pairs of within this data set or this site set, we have 4 pairs of lake and peat bogs. We did the age model on all of those environmental archive using lead-210 and cesium-137. We have the advantage to have like a peatland that is actually just adjacent to the lake, so we can actually correct for sediment focusing in the lake. And we're validating, of course, our age model with chronostratigraphic marker. Cesium-137, which is a classic one, works well in the lake. And the peat bog, a bit more complicated because cesium seems to be a bit more mobile, but because we're in the Abitibi region, we have a very nice, well-defined peak of lead that has a very distinct isotopic signature of the Archean Abitibi sulfur. So we can actually use this as a chronostratigraphic marker. So just a refresh of the conundrum that we left you with last year for the people that were following us last year. Joëlle presented you the reconstruction of the flood of lead in Lac Vaudreuil. So an increase here, the blue line, that matches very well with the maximum of emission of the smelter for lead, and then a decrease to this residual lingering baseline here, flux that is higher than pre-industrial. What was also interesting is that the isotopic ratio of this lead was actually moving from something more regional to something that was very matching very well the specific signature of the Archean sulfur of Abitibi here. And more importantly, this signature was not bouncing back when the flux decreased. It was still actually lead derived from this Abitibi sulfur, Archean sulfur. So the question is, where is this coming from? So to answer this question, we looked at the archive, the peat bog that was next to the lake, which is actually an archive that only records atmospheric input. And by doing so, here you actually have the pairs of lake and peat. And you see Lac Vaudreuil, the continuous blue line here that goes down to this lingering back flux here, residual flux. And if you look at his friend, the peat bog that is just next to it, which is the dotted line in blue, you see that we are going down all the way to pre-industrial background. And that tells us that basically what we actually record in the lake in the past like 30 years or so is not a direct atmospheric deposition of lead. It's actually inherited, a legacy inherited from the surrounding soil around the lake, and probably erosion in the small watershed of this headwater lake. And if you look at the other lake that I showed here, like the full line, or in purple and in green, you see exactly the same thing. You see a residual lingering flux that we also interpret as a inherited legacy erosion flux from the watershed. So that's an interesting and important conclusion that we have here. And because we've done like all the lead isotope measurement and all this environmental archive, we're able to do the source apportionment of the contribution of the different sources of lead in the region, provided that we're actually picking the right sources. So here we picked natural lead isotopic signature that would be like pre-industrial background in our archives. We picked the very distinctive isotopic signature of lead in the Archean sulfur of Abitibi, and then the lead isotopic signature of the additive of lead additive in gasoline in eastern Canada. Run this to a Bayesian model to take into account the variability of the isotopic signature of this end member, and we end up with that. So we actually quantifying 5.
2 minutes, Josue.
Okay, we're actually quantifying different fluxes here, and you see that you have an overwhelming flux of Abitibi sulfur-derived lead in the 70s, matching with the maximum of emission. And then when you arrive to this lingering flux in the last 30 years, it's actually 100% coming from lead derived from the Abitibi ore. And if we integrate this over the 7.5 square kilometer of the lake, just as a back of an envelope calculation, over 27 years, which would be roughly the difference of time between might and nowadays, we have an additional 1.6 ton of lead deposited in the lake just from inherited legacy of former deposition. We can do the same exercise for the peat bog, and you see that we're going back down to pre-industrial baseline right there. I just wanted to show you the tin, because tin might be an interesting proxy for recycling of electronic waste. And you see here that actually it shows very well the peak of smelting of emission of the smelter in the 60s, 70s, so associated with the ore in the Abitibi. But then we have this classical lingering baseline of flux as well. But what we can see is that there is an increase after in the last 10 years that we can also see in the bog of Vaudreuil. So we're wondering if this might be actually a good candidate for a proxy for electronic recycling. We, of course, have to check for what diagenesis could do to that, but we have two very different archives with two different geochemical behavior, so that might not be a problem. So I will leave you with that slide with what we still need to do and the work that our students in this project will do over the next couple of years. Thank you for your attention. If you have questions now or later.
Merci, Josue. Thanks, Josue.